Hey, Seraphin here, and in this video, our Shokupan is getting a makeover. Rather than keeping the crust regular texture and color, rough and golden brown, we're making the crust snowy white and super soft instead. Yes, getting rid of that brown crust. So you may ask, why do that? Well, to give you the backstory, I want to show you this press release from the Imperial Hotel of Tokyo, which I found not so long ago. In essence, what the release said was, as part of the company's efforts to reduce food waste, they decided to focus on the crusts of the bread that were cut off during the making of sandwiches, which, by their own estimate, amounted to an annual food waste of 2.5 tons. In the release, they explained that the difficulty in reusing these bread crusts was due to the remnants of the sandwich ingredients on them, making it hard to use the crusts in other recipes. And instead of making further efforts to recycle these bread crusts, the solution they decided on was to make the bread crustless, in the sense that the bread was baked so that it never had a crust to start with. So apparently, after about half of a year of trial and error, they developed a white bread with a new texture that required no discard of the crust to be made into sandwiches. This is certainly a very interesting approach to reducing food waste for the hotel, and while I've never been one to cut off the brown crust when making sandwiches, I do understand the appeal and demand for these sandwiches. This soft and basically crustless bread is a convenient solution, and while it's pretty rare to find this bread in many Western bakeries at the moment, this kind of bread isn't really a new idea. Long before this press release from the Imperial Hotel, if you were paying attention to the evolution of the Japanese bread scene, you would have known that this type of bread, which is normally called Shiropan, literally white bread, has been around in Japan and other Asian countries for quite a while. It is also widely known in Chinese bread recipes as 天使白面包, or angel white bread. And the way it has been made is pretty standard across the board, which is by baking the bread at a low heat, sprinkling the top part of the bread with flour just before baking, and then covering the bread during baking with parchment paper or aluminum foil. Google Shiropan or 天使白面包, and you'll get these results. Such pale white breads would look underbaked by many Western recipes that call for baking until the crust turns golden brown or even darker, if you're working with lean breads. But these breads are relatively popular in the aforementioned Asian countries, even when disregarding their use in making crustless sandwiches. It's likely that this is one of the big differences in the perception of bread in Asia and the West. Tangzhong and udane are well-known originally Asian methods to making the bread softer for longer, and this is taking it one step further by baking at a much lower temperature to really prevent that crust from even forming. I do think that these breads are a bit like steamed buns in their coloring and overall texture. Now, while there are quite a few recipe videos for these kinds of snowy white buns or dinner rolls, there are very few snowy shokupan videos, which is a shame because this kind of bread really does make for a perfect sandwich, and it's also delicious on its own. While I love the regular shokupan I made, this feels like a fun and equally delicious variant of it. Additionally, the science behind making this bread soft and snowy in color is pretty interesting. When you bake bread in the oven, the two main processes that cause the bread to turn brown are the Maillard reaction and caramelization. These two are in food everywhere. You may recognize caramelization in caramel candy, and the Maillard reaction is also found in steak, cookies, and various other foods. These two processes happen at slightly different temperature ranges, with the Maillard reaction generally happening at lower temperatures than caramelization. This reaction is also responsible for a lot of the flavor we associate with the browning. That's why it's generally sought after. But not everyone loves this flavor, and the Maillard reaction doesn't exclusively produce good chemicals. They also produce the carcinogenic acrylamide. The same goes for caramelization. So, how can we minimize these two processes from happening? Well, the quickest thing to do would be to just get rid of the added sugar. Without any of these sugars in the dough, there won't be as much of these processes that rely on them happening in the first place. This will, however, lead to less or no sweetness in the bread, and the yeast activity will also be affected. They'll need to get their source of energy elsewhere, such as from the flour. For a quick recipe like this, the absence of sugar means less flavor, a harder texture, and a generally less palatable bread. This is hardly the way to make a proper shokupan. Thankfully, there are other things we can do to prevent the two processes while still getting all the things we want. We've already mentioned one, which is that we can bake the bread at a lower temperature. So the bread never really enters the temperature range that triggers the Maillard reaction and caramelization. We can also add another kind of natural sugar that does not partake in the Maillard reaction and resists caramelization. It is also our star ingredient for this recipe, trehalose. To explain, trehalose is a disaccharide like maltose, but unlike maltose reducing sugar, trehalose is a non-reducing sugar, and what that means for us in the context of bread browning is that it does not undergo the Maillard reaction with compounds containing amino groups, such as proteins found in bread. So trehalose will not make the bread browner due to the Maillard reaction, and it also resists caramelization, which is an added bonus. Trehalose is a relatively unknown sugar, but while you may not have heard a lot about it, it's likely that we used to rely on it a lot more in ancient times than we do nowadays, considering that it's found in fungi and invertebrates, including lobsters, crab, prawns, mushrooms, and insects. It's also found in honey, especially stingless bee honey, as well as sunflower seeds, mirin, baker's yeast, brewer's yeast, and it is known as a cell protectant and plays a role in the ability of many organisms to survive severe cold, heat, and dehydration. That is part of why it has been called a sugar of life or resurrection sugar, because of its association with the survival of several organisms that live under extreme environmental conditions. Until relatively recently, trehalose has been incredibly expensive to produce. It's found in mostly trace quantities in the wild, and it's difficult to extract the trehalose from the organisms that contain it. So the use of trehalose in anything was naturally hampered by the overwhelming cost. Take, for example, from this experiment that 1 gram of baker's yeast produced around 0.08 grams of trehalose. Therefore, the use of trehalose was limited to certain high-end products. That was until a Japanese company worked out a far more efficient way to produce trehalose by identifying enzymes from groups of bacteria that could produce trehalose from starch. The company commercialized this method, and the price of trehalose dropped from hundreds of dollars per kilogram to less than $10. This propelled the use of trehalose, and the global market for trehalose has grown greatly since then. It is now used in a variety of products, from cosmetics and medicine to food. Being about 45% as sweet as sugar, trehalose cannot be considered a sugar replacement because it has a very low intensity of sweetness. But it has a lingering, refreshing taste and is often described as being mild but with a clean aftertaste. I personally enjoy the taste a lot, and I also greatly appreciate that it's tooth-friendly, unlike regular table sugar, with multiple studies finding that trehalose doesn't lower the pH in the mouth to a point where it promotes dental caries. Much of the research on trehalose is still ongoing, but what has come out so far is very exciting. One of the most interesting is trehalose's therapeutic potential in neurodegenerative diseases such as Parkinson's and Alzheimer's disease. Trehalose has been reported to display neuroprotective mechanisms that could greatly benefit patients. Trehalose has also been used in several clinical trials for several diseases with overall positive results, and it has been described to suppress bone resorption and inflammation, induce autophagy, and alleviate Huntington's disease. The precise mechanisms of action behind all these benefits are as of yet still relatively unclear, but much research has shown trehalose to be non-toxic, with the only exception being if you are intolerant to trehalose, which works in a similar way to lactose intolerance. Although lactose intolerance is a lot more common than trehalose intolerance, you might want to skip using trehalose if you feel uncomfortable after eating mushrooms, since they sometimes contain larger percentages of trehalose. Other than that, Trehalose has been reported to be mostly safe and probably quite beneficial to us, and is also very functional in our food. Many of Trehalose's benefits come from the fact that it's very stable, and it's also very good at stabilizing other things like proteins and carbohydrates, as well as flavors and textures. Some of the studies done on Trehalose display how remarkable it really is. In one such study, the authors blended fresh eggs with Trehalose and then dried the mixture at 30 to 50 degrees Celsius. The end product was an odorless yellow powder that could be kept at room temperature, and when it was rehydrated, it was said to be indistinguishable from an equivalent fresh egg mixture. Similar studies were done with fruits and herbs, with Trehalose being shown to be capable of preserving the texture and flavor of fresh fruits and herbs, including the color as well. In one study where they added Trehalose to a basic dough recipe, they found that it increased specific volume, decreased bread hardness, reduced the rate of bread firming, and improved the bread's sensory qualities when compared with control. All in all, it made the bread taste better, softer, and delayed staling. But there's a catch: the yeast cannot eat Trehalose, making it impossible to fully substitute the sugar with Trehalose. With all these benefits and shortcomings in mind, it should be easy to see why this sugar was perfect for this bread recipe. We're starting this recipe with poolish, 100 grams of water, and 1/4 teaspoon of instant yeast, along with 100 grams of bread flour. We then mix all these ingredients together using a pair of chopsticks, which serve this purpose exceptionally well. You could also use a spatula, naturally. A very fast derivative ingredient to make. We just need to ensure all the flour is hydrated and everything is homogeneous. Then we can clean off our chopsticks, cover the bowl, and we can leave the yeast to do their work. We let it ferment outside at a room temperature of 28 degrees Celsius for 2 hours, just to ferment and rise for a bit. Then we want to place it in the fridge overnight. We can do this without worrying about the yeast activity because we're adding more instant yeast later. So our priority for this poolish is to build its taste and aroma. And after one night, we're going to start making our final dough. We have our mixing bowl at the center with all the ingredients we need around it. So going around the bowl, we add the poolish first. We use our spatula again to remove any parts still stuck to the glass. With the poolish in, we add our liquids then. 50 grams of water, 50 grams of milk, just pouring it in. 30 grams of honey, and we'll just scrape it all in with our spatula. We next add our special ingredient, 15 grams of Trehalose, just casting it in. 5 grams of salt, or about 3/4 teaspoon. And 1/4 teaspoon of instant yeast. And finally, for now, 200 grams of bread flour. At the side, we have 16 grams of butter, softened and ready to go. We just want to mix the dough for a few minutes before tossing it in. So we give the contents of the bowl a very good mix with our spatula first, just aiming for a shaggy configuration where the flour is at least partially hydrated. Then we take the bowl to our stand mixer, already fitted with a dough hook attachment. Immediately, we'll bring the speed up to medium-high, and we'll let this run for 3 minutes. This is a very easy dough to work with, I have to say, and in the mixing process, it should come together quite quickly. We just want to mix it until it looks smooth and round, no more than that. At that point, we'll stop the mixer and add our butter using our trusty spatula to make sure it's all in. Then we start up the mixer again slowly at first, giving it a few seconds as we bring the speed back up to medium-high. And then we want to let it run for another 5 minutes from here. Thanks to the Trehalose, this is a very soft dough, and the butter definitely makes that more pronounced. That being said, while the dough does take some time to come together, it's pretty strong when it does and leaves a rather clean bowl. You need to make sure to let the mixer run until it gets to this point, smooth and in a ball with clean sides around it. We already have that in front of us, so we turn off the mixer and pull up the dough. Taking it off the dough hook with our scraper, we'll bring the bowl up to the table. We're now going to cover our hands in a bowl for the dough to rest in with oil. Just a little vegetable oil is needed. And then we can get to our dough. The dough is really soft and an absolute delight to work with. So we just want to scoop the dough out of the bowl and shape it into a smooth and round dough in our hands. Many people like to do this on the work surface, but then you need a little flour to dust it, and I think it's more convenient like this. We'll put the dough ball into our prepared bowl. We'll also do a quick window pane test here, just taking a small piece and stretching it out to see light through it. This is not the most extensible or thin dough that I've seen, but it still easily passes the test. Then we cover, leaving that to ferment for 15 minutes at a room temperature of 28 degrees Celsius. During that time, our dough will puff up and it should roughly get to 2 times its original volume, as you can see here. This can vary depending on your room temperature and conditions, so it's best to observe your dough. When the bulk fermentation is done, we'll uncover the dough, just taking a moment to admire how nice the dough smells, before dusting the work surface with a bit of flour as well as our hands and the top of the dough. Then we punch the dough down to properly degas it. If the dough is well fermented, the gas should escape easily and the dough should absolutely not bounce back. It should be relaxed, and thanks to the coat of oil, it should be very easy to remove from the bowl. We'll weigh the whole thing. And then we want to divide the dough into 2 equal pieces. Just with a scraper right down the middle. I'm not even using any flour here because it's so easy to work with. We'll then measure the 2 dough pieces, adjusting them until they are of the same weight. Right after that, we pre-shape them gently by tucking and rolling them into round balls. While we do want the top surface to be smooth and relatively free of creases, pre-shaping them too tightly is unnecessary. We only need to make them into an even shape here, and we need them to relax for the shaping. Which is why we'll cover the 2 dough balls, let them relax for 10 minutes as a bench rest. In the meantime, we'll quickly coat our Pullman loaf pan with some non-stick lining, using a silicone brush to spread it all over, every side and every corner so the bread doesn't stick anywhere. Since we're baking the bread covered, we'll also line the cover well. When it's all done, we'll set the pan aside. And here the dough is after the rest. They should have spread out a little bit, and it's time to shape them. Taking a little flour, we dust the tops of the dough balls before moving one out of the way off to the side. And then we flip the other over onto the surface. We dust with flour as needed, making sure it's well coated and won't stick to anything, because we're going to be rolling the dough out into a long rectangle next. Pressing forward, doing our best to degas the dough, using our hands to straighten out the sides and make the shape more rectangular. The dough doesn't have to be very long. Our main purposes are to make the shape neat, patting the edges down to get rid of larger bubbles, and degas it fully, as well as make sure the distribution of the dough is uniform. No parts of the dough should be thicker than the other. We'll then fold in the sides like so. This will help straighten the side even more. and we flatten over it with our rolling pin a few more times, again making sure that there are no large gas bubbles, straightening and tidying up as necessary. Before pinning the bottom down with our fingers, just to make certain that it's well affixed, then we curl the dough into a roll from top to bottom. To get a neat roll here, we're trying our best not to tug on the dough, just gently rolling it up like this. And we pinch to seal the seams shut. We'll repeat this for the other piece of dough. This dough ball has had a little more time to rest, so it's a little puffier and more relaxed than the previous one. We want to make sure to properly degas it as before. It's very important if we don't want any gaping holes in our crumb. Again, sprinkling with flour here and there to stop the dough from sticking. When rolling the dough out, we're also doing our best to stretch the dough out and not down. It helps prevent sticking and gives us a long shape with an even layer of thickness. And when we're done with the 2 rolls of dough, we want to put them into the loaf pan. We won't put them in randomly, we want to arrange them so that their swirls are in opposing directions. We usually arrange them on the work surface first before placing them in the pan. We'll also give them a little press down once they're in to fit them into the pan and also adjust their positions to be more centered if needed. Then we cover the pan and let this proof for 55 minutes. As always, before the dough is done, we set aside enough time to preheat the oven. We're preheating it to 180 degrees Celsius. When the dough is ready and the oven has been preheated, we're going to bake the dough. This baking step is very important in getting the pale outer crust of the bread, so do take caution here. We're first making sure to stack several layers of parchment paper on top of the bread to prevent the top from heating too quickly. Then we put the pan into the oven, lowering the heat from 180 degrees Celsius to 160 degrees Celsius, with the rack in the middle and the heat setting at top and bottom heat. We'll bake at this setting for 18 minutes before turning the heat further down to 140 degrees Celsius and continuing to bake for 12 minutes. After which the bread is done. Before we get the bread out, we give the pan a good knock just to prevent its deflation. Then we slide it out. If everything's gone well, the bread should look like this, a well-baked, pale shade without a brown crust on any side. This bread also smelled absolutely wonderful, by the way. It has such a sweet and rich aroma. It's incredibly soft too, making it quite difficult to cut into slices. And I'd say it definitely leans towards the sweet side rather than savory. 100% recommended for all the people who don't like the brown crust on loaf breads. The crust here is barely noticeable and tastes just like the crumb, really. And that's it for today. Thanks for watching and bye!